Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Ridiculously Good Reads Book Club from First Presbyterian Church, where we've been reading through Lila by Marilynne Robinson, part of the extended Gilead Marilynne Robinson universe of novels and other things. So maybe not other things. I guess I'm only aware of novels set in the universe, but I'm sure at some point there'll be other things set in the universe. My name is Damon Jensen Heitman. I am one of the pastors at First Presbyterian Church in Hastings, Nebraska, and joined by Constance. Would you like to go first?
Hi, I'm Constance Malloy. I'm a retired English professor from Hastings College, and I still like to read.
That's good, because we've been doing a fair amount of it. And also Jenny.
Hi, I'm Jenny Welsh. I am a current English instructor for Bellevue University and CCC here in Hastings. And I would just like to add on that, Damon, I'm very glad, if I haven't said this yet, I'm very glad that you always do that first intro, because I cannot say that word, the ridiculously. I can't do it. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, it's a ridiculous word that I made up for
Great.
this. So we are up to page 219 in the book, which is right about where I have gotten. Lila has just gotten a ride to Indianola, actually, not quite to Des Moines. And that's, she returns to Iowa, actually. So, but that's not where this section starts. This section starts with a whole bunch of interesting stuff about Lila's time in St. Louis and how she got to St. Louis and why she got to St. Louis, I suppose, and what her life was like in St. Louis. And part of that time, I suppose in some ways, revolves around a credenza. Jenny, what do we need to know about this credenza?
Well, we've gotten into this section here where we're still getting information that's confusing. And then within the same section, we're actually getting some answers, which is nice, or at least some more insight. I don't really know if we get answers, but we get more backstory. And in this section, early in this section, so page 187, she's again talking with Ames. And I will also mention that we've talked about this a lot, that time and the narrative are hopping around a lot in this book. I feel like that gets even stronger in this fifth section of the book that we read for this week. I mean, there's a certain part that is so dense. We'll have to talk about that in a bit. Put a pin in that one. But okay, on page 187, Lila and Ames are talking, and okay, they're talking about his house, and I think he's offering to, do you want to change things? Do you want to? He's trying to make her feel more comfortable. Wants her to want to stay. What can he do? What can she do to make it better for her? And she sort of out of the blue asks, "You ever heard of a credenza?" And he laughed. "A credenza? I've seen the word somewhere, I suppose. I'm not quite sure I know what one is." And she says that she doesn't want one. And this is another instance, we talked about this last time, of Ames laughing. She's insulted. Ames is as confused as we are. Why is a credenza a no-no? But then we get to that within the same section, which is one of the tighter loops that I think we get to have in the book.
Yeah, I had forgotten all about this particular conversation, but that previewed the credenza of any sort. So I'm glad, Jenny, that you remembered it and brought it to our attention. Part of this is, so Lila ends up in St. Louis, and she ends up in a whorehouse in St. Louis, a cat house, whatever the appropriate a brothel, whatever the appropriate term is to use for it. And the credenza, and there's a credenza there that the lady who manages the house, just call her Mrs. That's where she locks up the personal effects of all of the women in the house. And it's kind of this way of, it's really, I think it's kind of a way of keeping them there, right? It's
well, it's controlling them, certainly.
right. Because the only way to get these things back is, you know, essentially if you manage to pay off your debt to her, and you're never going to actually pay off your debt.
And she also uses it as a, in real time, sort of punishment, threat, dangle.
Behavior modification.
What's that?
Behavior modification.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Of oh, well, if you just do this, maybe I'll let you read your sister's letters, and many other examples. It's a very much, it's a symbol of, like you said, Constance, control. And then there's that, like, so we learn about this credenza in the brothel, and then we learn that Lila has managed to hide her knife. I'm not really sure how she did that, doll's knife that she has on her. But then there's this whole scene where she gives Mrs. the knife, which is it's a hard section to read because it really shows like how far Lila has sort of given up on herself. And it's like, she's just, okay, I'm stuck here. She's sort of giving in to the prospect of this new place and longing for belonging in such a way that she's like willing to be stuck there in the same way that the other girls are, because there's no way she would leave if she didn't have Doll's knife.
Yeah, I think we should probably back up and say that she's lost Doll.
Yes.
You know, Doll got in the knife fight. Doll escaped from her rocking chair in front of the jail, and it's unlikely she could have lived through that. Lila went searching for her, and when she's given up and she doesn't belong to anybody, it's almost like she's punishing herself. It's like this is a way to go to hell or something, but at least it's somebody to see over her, a place to belong, but it's really the depths of ugh.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You know, I was just going to say there is this sense of Lila sort of saying, well, this is kind of where I knew I was always going to end up. And so, yes. And so I guess this is what the rest of my days are going to. This is where I'm going to be. So just accept it. Don't matter anyway, she might think or might say, right?
Okay, this is something that I maybe missed in the reading, but Constance, I noticed in your notes, when we were learning about Doll's face and what happened to Doll's face, that happened in a brothel fight. Is that how you read that? Okay.
Yeah.
I missed that detail. Like I knew it was a fight. I honestly at first thought it was a birthmark, maybe. You know, the first part of the book. I wasn't sure what.
Yeah, we're never told what it is.
Okay.
So it could be a birthmark, it could be a scar, it could be anything. And this is the first time we get background for it. But yeah, it's another woman in a house of prostitution, heated up a pan fiery hot, and then with all of her strength bashed Doll across the cheek with it, broke her cheek so that she, was in a coma, maybe. I mean, in really bad shape for a long time.
And Lila learns about this through Doll telling her, or are we unclear on that?
I think what happens is that when Lila was a sickly little girl, Doll would kind of hold her and just, in order to keep her alive, tell her stories.
Mhm.
And so this is a story that's in Lila's subconscious that comes back to her all of a sudden when she's in the brothel.
Okay. Which makes me wonder, like when Damon, when you're saying that, perhaps she always thought she was destined for this, maybe it's because of this story about Doll and Doll's experiences in the brothel that, Lila's like, well, if Doll was at a brothel, then I'll end up at one too. I don't know why she feels destined for that. I mean, other than the fact that she's untethered, after losing Doll.
She's really untethered. I wrote down on 188, misery must have been what she was looking for. That's a quotation. But I think I like that idea of yours, Jenny, because even taking a baby, that's another, that's what Doll did. So that's what I'll do.
Yes. Which you had made a good point about that too. The idea of, so this is when she's with, do we know the name of the house? Does anyone know the name of the house? Okay.
No.
It's just the house with Mrs. Okay. So when she's at the house in St. Louis and we're meeting all these girls, as they're referred to, which by the way, we don't know any of their real names. Lila's given another name, Rosie, because there's nobody else named Rosie currently. Which
she wanted to be Doll.
Yes, that's right. Which in a series of books that is all about names and the significance of names, that unto itself is interesting. This idea that these women's names are taken away from them, right?
Yeah.
But as we're meeting these different girls and learning about their life and their existence under the control of Mrs., one of them ends up pregnant. And this is where, I almost said Doll, this is where Lila starts to sort of see a glimmer of hope, right? Constance, can you say more about what you thought about that?
Well, this is Mac's baby, and she has a big crush on Mac.
And Mac is a regular at the brothel, right?
Right.
Okay.
And he seems to usually go upstairs with Missy. So presumably she could have his baby without having him. And this becomes a whole new fantasy world for her.
For Lila. Like Lila,
Yes.
Lila thinks she's going to take that baby, right? Because she knows that Mrs. won't let Missy keep the baby.
Right.
But because Doll took her, she sees it again as not I don't know that she sees it as not a problem, but she sees it as an option that she could take this baby, save the baby, and I guess save herself in the process too.
Right. She would go reenact the life that she had with Doll.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's the second character in short succession, I suppose, in which Lila must see herself, right? In the previous section, we have the young man who shows up at the shack where she had been living outside of Gilead, and she sees she must see herself in this kid in some way, shape, or form. And now we have the anticipation of this unwanted, not necessarily unwanted child, but
unallowed.
Yeah. A baby that is not going to get the care that it really needs or wants. And yeah, and so I would assume Lila is seeing herself, anticipating seeing herself in this not as of then unborn child.
She would rescue the child
the
way she was rescued.
Yeah, it's you were talking about names, Jenny, and it reminded me of within the scriptural witness, every once in a while we get an unnamed character
Okay.
that shows up. The one that I can think of just off the top of my head is the Road to Emmaus story. This is a post-resurrection story. Jesus shows up. There's two disciples walking along the road to Emmaus. Emmaus is a town walking along a wilderness road. And Emmaus is a town that nobody knows where it is. So it could be kind of anywhere, could be any town. And one of the disciples is named and the other disciple doesn't get a name. And sometimes interpreters will say, well, having an unnamed character in this story allows the reader of the story kind of a point of entry to it. And especially because this would have been an oral tradition narrative, that unnamed character could have been anybody. It could have been me, it could have been you, it could have been my uncle, it could have been whomever. That is now that unnamed person is an eyewitness to the resurrection. And so I think that could really be sort of anybody. And if we don't know Lila's name, we don't know the name of that young man that showed up at the shack.
We don't know Doll's name either.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting to me then that the characters that we don't get an actual name for are the characters who are really on the margins and are the characters who are really at risk in one way, shape, or form. So then that could be anybody. Anybody could be at risk in this way. Anybody could end up being a child who wasn't loved as fully as they should have been, or wasn't cared for as fully as they should have been.
And any woman could end up in the position that Doll did or that Lila did. I mean, in terms of feeling like this is my only option, is to go to this route of survival, and at least I'll belong to something.
Yeah. So I hadn't made that connection until we started talking about names. So thank you.
Well, and it's interesting the example you picked from scripture in terms of wilderness, because that's actually a really big deal to Lila. I noticed, I didn't mark it in my notes, but I noticed several times as I was reading, when she's daydreaming about, where she's going to take this baby, she is longing to duplicate what Doll did for her. She just wants to be out of the city. She wants to be out in the country. She wants to be in the wild. And it takes her several attempts and but several different steps to actually get back to that, which is then where we, start with her and eventually making it to Gilead.
Yeah, that's kind of her true self. It's really weird to me that she would seek to be in this house, this dark house where the shades are always drawn and the credenza is likened to a coffin. And we've just seen the person that Lila killed, being in a coffin, and that image kind of haunts her.
Yeah, the person that Doll killed.
Right.
Yeah, and she ends up in St. Louis in the brothel. Doll, she's living on her own. Lila is living on her own somewhere. She doesn't know that Doll is around, but apparently Doll is around, close enough to get herself to her doorstep as she's bleeding out from her injuries. And in the process of helping Doll, she gets Doll's blood and the blood of the person that Doll killed sort of all over her, and I think she only has 2 dresses.
Something like that.
And she rips one up to use as bandages. So she needs a new dress. She goes to the shop to get a new dress. She tries to cover up the blood as best as she can. The shopkeeper notices the blood on the part of the dress that's sticking out underneath the coat, assumes that doll has had an unwanted child. Maybe assumes that doll has not
Doll or Lila?
Lila,
Okay.
yeah. Assumes that Lila has maybe had an abortion, whatever the case, gives her an address of a house that takes in girls like her, I think maybe.
Mm-hmm.
She
Yeah,
says,
which is so strange that she would then, like you're saying, that she would go that direction because she was already doing stuff on her own. She was working in a
She had a
shop.
job. Yeah.
Yeah.
She
So
had
I
a
don't
job at the store.
why doll coming. I mean, obviously, besides the trauma and heartache and loss of doll showing up and then dying, is really confirming, right? She does die in front of Lila or not?
No,
No?
she doesn't die in front of her.
Okay.
She
No.
goes off and
And we can only
presumably dies
assume.
somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah, because she doesn't reappear.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting to me then that when doll kind of not necessarily first shows up, but doll shows up out of nowhere when Lila is a baby and takes her and carries her to safety. And now here, doll has shown up out of nowhere, but now doll's appearance is not going to lead Lila to safety, is going to lead Lila to this credenza, right? To this place of condemnation, I suppose, in some way. And maybe Lila is concerned for her own safety as well. Not whoever wanted to do this to doll maybe also wants to do this to me. I don't really know who's around.
I don't see her thinking. I mean, I would think that way, but I don't see any evidence that she's thinking that way. I think it's just the trauma of losing doll.
Mm-hmm.
There are some really interesting comments in the book about trauma and fear that jumped out at me because, I mean, they work off of just other stuff that I've read about the body and the way we store trauma and memory and such in our physical body. But so, okay, there's two of them. One is on page 178, and she's talking about, this is when she's at the shop and the person is noticing the dress and she's like, guilty of the saddest crime there is. Old shame falling to her when it had been worn to rags by so many women before her. This idea of inheriting the shame of others through the continued wearing of their clothes kind of thing. And then the other one is on page 183. This is when she's trying to come up with a name for Mrs. and you can't be doll, so you ain't doll. And talking about the credenza looking like a coffin. And then here's this time shift. Here's this, like, in the same paragraph, we jump from that recollection to now she's talking to the baby in her belly. There was a stirring under her heart, so she said to the child, I won't breathe a word to you about that place, but I guess you might know anyway, because that fear has never left my body, has just hidden in it, waiting. You might feel it down in your poor little bones. God bless them. There's a lot here, I think, about Lila's mental state. I feel like this section in particular, we see a very fill in the blank negative word for her mental state. It's just really kind of all over the place and also very dark. We get a sense that when she lost the opportunity to take that baby from the brothel, that she's suicidal. And then I don't know. I feel like there's a mental shift happening in this section that really shows us how she's struggling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at some point in her time, she's oftentimes worried about what she is passing along to her own child, wondering sort of what will the child know essentially from just being a part of me. And there, I think also in this section in St. Louis, mostly set in St. Louis, she just stops talking. She goes for maybe a year without really talking to anyone.
And that's a response to trauma. And remember that when Doll first took her, she didn't talk. She just had those outbursts about, well, you're going to hell or something, when they tried to comb her hair. But, I've read, I don't know, countless novels where people who are traumatized, and it's usually women, and a lot of times because they're sexually abused, stop talking. I mean, little girls.
Yeah, and it's a pattern. Like I had forgotten about that when she was first taken by Doll, but it's a definite. Not only is it like a common trauma response, but it's a pattern for Lila then to have that happen multiple times in her life that we get to hear about or learn about.
Yeah, and she, Constance, I think before we started recording, you were talking about a lot of this section sort of reflects on the importance of having someone to care for, or to care about. I'm not entirely sure. And I lost the second half of that thought, but she starts talking to herself in this section of the novel, and she comes up, I think also in this section, she starts to maybe in some ways discover her own self-worth. She realized, I think at some point she says that she was no good at whoring, I think is what she says to herself. And she comes up with this sort of plan to be able to pay the debt that she now owes to Mrs. And essentially she's going to start doing the housework around the house. And I think sort of somewhere in that process, I think she kind of rediscovers maybe her own self-worth. And then eventually she grabs her knife and runs, essentially.
Right.
But I don't know how you folks reacted to that. She decides, well, I'm going to be the one to start the coals in the morning, and after I do this, I'm going to go up and scrub the kitchen. Right. And Mrs. probably won't care because it's going to save her money.
Right, and she's not attracting the men anyway. It just occurred to me that that's a really kind of hellish scene where she's down in the basement with the fire, stoking the fire. And I think Jenny and I were talking before we started recording about there's a real turning point when she's left the brothel. She's working, I think, for about 3 years in a hotel in St. Louis. And then on the street, she sees Mac, and she perceives that he's kind of making a joke about her to another man, like, look how, watch how she, adores me or something. I can do anything. And she gathers all of herself together and walks away and leaves town. This is like her first impetus to take care of herself.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Jenny.
Well, she wanted, the sense I got, or the sense I'm remembering, is that she wanted to get all the way out of St. Louis to begin with, right? When she first left the house. There was something like, and then she just couldn't go that far. And like, okay, here's this hotel. I made it to this hotel. I guess that will do. At least that's how I remember reading it. But then, yeah, she's there for a chunk of time before this happens. We were kind of talking about how like losing the hope of getting Missy's baby pushed her out of the brothel, and then seeing Mac and feeling that, I don't know, that offense or that insult then pushes her out of St. Louis. She sort of has to have these breaking points to get her to move to the next step.
Yeah, and she's living kind of on, movies and remaking movies in her head with better endings, and so she's not living a real life.
Yes, it's escapism. I mean, she is saving up her money. She's not saving up her money so she can buy a bus ticket or do something to get her, or even like to buy better living circumstances or clothes or food. She's saving her money so she can go to 2 movies a week and escape and not have to think about her life, which I hadn't really paid attention prior to this, but I'm pretty sure there are mentions of her going to or watching movies with Ames too. And it's an interesting, carryover that we then learn. It's like, oh, that was kind of her main coping mechanism during this time of her life.
Yeah, he wants, I think he watches All Quiet on the Western Front or something. And she's more interested in chick flicks.
Right.
And she also, going to the movie is also kind of an alone together sort of thing. That she would sit in a theater with a group of other folks, and they would all be happy at the same time, or they would all be sad at the same time, even though they didn't know each other. She wasn't talking to anyone that sat next to
touch. Like she would talk about touching someone's arm or bumping someone's leg, and so it was almost that like baseline human interaction, emotionally and then also physically too for her.
So there's some sort of, while we're watching a movie, we're kind of in it together for a little while, at least. And sometimes their popcorn would tip towards her. I seem to recall.
Exactly. It's very constructed community.
And then she has this interaction, not really an interaction. She sees Mac. She's got a little room somewhere, and she kind of watches life go by for everybody else. And she has this interaction with Mac and decides to get out of St. Louis. Has money for a bus ticket, doesn't get one. I can't quite remember why. Ends up some stranger drives by and kind of offers to scoop her up off of a porch, essentially, right? And so she gets in a car with a
Pentecostal woman.
I think a Nazarene, I think.
Oh, Nazarene. Okay.
From the Church of Nazarene woman, who's, I don't have any idea, in her 20s, maybe. I don't know, maybe about the same age as Lila.
I thought she was a little older because she hasn't married.
She wanted to marry somebody right out of high school, and her mom, but then I don't know, somebody wouldn't allow it. He went off to war. Her mom said, well, if he loves you, he'll wait, and he didn't wait. And she's at the point now where she's starting to wonder if she'll ever get married. She kind of reveals, but gives her a ride, asks her where she's going. Lila says, Iowa. And she says, me too. and she'd like the company. And so Lila gets in this car. She's got all her bags packed anyway. Gets in this car and goes and starts riding very slowly to Iowa.
Quite the journey.
Mm-hmm. So, and along the way, the gal says that she's really she should be trying to convert Lila because she's Nazarene, but she's not really very good at that. And so there's kind of driving along to Iowa. I don't know. What did you think?
Yeah, I mean,
there's more rain. There's more rain and water along the way.
More rain and water. Yes. Ooh, there are 2 nature comments here that jumped out at me that also kind of go with Lila and her like desire to be back in nature, right? There's one where she talks about then the dirty part of winter, and I was like, oh yeah, every Midwestern person knows exactly what that means. But when she's in the car with the stranger, and it says, okay, wasn't too far from Des Moines. Lila had no reason to be in Des Moines. In fact, she didn't want to be in any town that was big enough for anybody to know where it was, which kind of helps us understand why she like sort of decides to stay in Gilead. I mean, even though she always seems to be wanting to leave also. But the other nature comment that got me, Lila was glad to be seeing the country again, the fields looking so green in the evening light. Knee-high by the 4th of July, so it must be June. Every farmhouse in its cloud of trees. And that just made me laugh because I grew up in the country of South Dakota, and on the sections, here's exactly where the farmhouse is because there's the grove and there's the next one and stuff. So you can just see these little dots of settled places among there. So I don't know. It's like a comedy of errors, even though it's not funny at all. This journey, like they have car trouble and the woman is asking Lila for help and Lila's like, yeah, sure, I know what I'm talking about. No, she doesn't. She's just making that up because she just wants to keep going. She doesn't want anything to actually stop their progress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the woman's concerned about her tires at some point, and Lila says, your tires are fine. She doesn't have any idea.
The Jedi mind trick right there.
Yeah, but she doesn't see the point in stopping and getting out and looking at something that neither one of them is going to know how to fix anyway.
Yeah.
So just keep going, right? So, and the car it dies pretty much anytime it goes up a hill. There's some hills between there and St. Louis, but they're not like mountains,
right?
In between there and St. Louis. So. Yeah, does she get a name, the driver of that car?
No.
Yeah. So here's another unnamed character that kind of comes along and swoops her up, I suppose, in some way.
And is actually very important to the story. I mean, we don't have Gilead as we know it or Ames as we know him without Lila ending up there, and it all sort of seems just so random. And I mean, I guess life.
I wrote down a quotation on 2:11, and this is okay. The life she'd decided she'd never have was there the whole time, trapped and furious.
Like the happy life?
Decided she'd never have. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which connects back to the conversation that we started our conversation with between Lila and Ames, where she said, I never thought I'd live in a house like this that has all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That also kind of reminds me. Also, that it kind of reminds me of an unborn baby. trapped and furious,
Mhm.
perhaps, or a swaddled baby, crying its little eyes out for many reasons that it maybe doesn't really understand. But
Right.
um,
And I think we have to understand this narrative. I mean, this wasn't clear to me as I started reading, but she is already Lila Ames when the story starts. And these are all just memories that popped in. But I'm looking back at 179. If she'd only known then what comfort was coming, she'd have spared herself a little.
Yeah.
mhm. Yeah. Someone maybe help me remember or to know Dorian Gray.
Yeah, that's an
What?
Oscar Wilde novel.
Okay.
And he
Is this the one that has something to do with like a painting that gets like worse and worse?
portrait. It's a portrait of him, and the portrait ages, but he doesn't. And I'm sure that's significant, but I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about it.
Yeah. But she knows what it is.
Mhm.
He does. Now, how would she know that?
Was it a
She
movie
might-
at some point?
Now that could be, yeah, I think that might be right now that you say that.
But yeah, that
Maybe.
is fun for her to know. Must have been a movie for her to know about it because she doesn't read. She reads the Bible.
Mhm. Yeah, we also get this, thinking of the Bible, we get this section shortly after, sort of in real time, Lila has started reading the book of Job,
Right.
which is a book about, and Ames says, you pick the most interesting parts of the read some easy stuff, maybe, please. But when that's a book about undue suffering and unjust suffering, and why do these? It's an exploration, really, of
Why do people suffer?
Yeah, why does suffering exist? Why do painful things happen? And they just kind of do. And so then it makes sense. In some, if this is the book that Lila is reading, it makes sense to me that some of these memories pop up for her at this time.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. It's interesting because in both Ezekiel and Job, she keeps saying, wow, these guys really know my life.
Yeah,
this is something I can really relate to.
Yeah, I didn't know that all these things that I knew about were written in a book somewhere.
Mhm. Did either of you notice how dense the inner monologue dialogue, I kind of feel like it's both, how dense that gets here in this, like especially towards the end of this section? It's, to me, very muddled, and we've been time hopping kind of this whole book and within the same paragraphs, and all of a sudden something, the Reverend's mentioned and then Doll is mentioned, and that does not make any sense, but that's kind of been her state the whole time. But I feel like it's worse here, and I guess I find myself trying to figure out why that might be. Like, is she having some sort of mental break? Is it the pregnancy? Is it just her general like lack of trust? I don't know if either of you have any thoughts on that, or if you noticed that. Maybe I was tired when I was reading, so it just seemed more intense.
Mm-hmm. Well, we also, maybe this is part of it, we also get in this section, earlier in the book, Lila and Boughton and Ames end up in a car and nobody says anything to one another, but Lila knows that Boughton and Ames are having a conversation. and she imagines what that conversation is. And here we get more of that. We get extended imagined conversations between Lila and Doll, where Lila is speaking to herself in Doll's voice, and imagining what Doll would say about her being in this brothel, and about how didn't I warned you not to go to places like this, and that adds some muddiness to it, I think, as well, because it's not just not just a plain memory, I suppose. It's a memory of an imagined conversation that I had with a person who wasn't there at the time. And it's also not just looking back in this section. It seems more and more as she becomes, I don't know if you can become more pregnant, as her pregnancy advances. I think she also starts spending time looking into the future.
Yes.
And so now it's not just past and present. Oh, and here's a thought about the future too, thrown in there as well, which I think muddies that some too.
And that's actually not, I just thought of this as you were saying that, that's not something she's really accustomed to doing. You know, they were in such a day-to-day or week or season sort of thing, like in this transient lifestyle she grew up in with Doll and Doan and those people, that thinking about the future has to feel so uncomfortable to her.
And she's got something to care about, but she's more and more realizing that she's attached to Ames here too, and that what she does will affect him.
Yeah.
If she leaves, that will hurt him. And she's much less, she's talking about herself or thinking about herself, but she's a different person now. She's a softer, gentler person. She remembers that Lila as being hard and not trusting. And she's growing a little bit more trusting.
There's we're close to, but I also found it a little bit more fuzzy in this section, Jenny, and dense, certainly at times. It also seemed like one of the longer sort of prolonged flashbacks, I guess, for like we stay in St. Louis for a long time. To sort of get all of that. And
it's a hard read. I mean, it's just, there is so much suffering in every direction there. I'm pretty sure I said last time that, this is an easier read and I'm in Robinson's da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, no, I am not. This is a challenge. So I'll take that back.
Well, we're about at the time where we might want to start wrapping up. In our notes here at Constance, you have something which I thought was interesting and we should share. But Lila, it's right at the end of your section of notes, right before Jenny's. You've written here, Lila used to think that where she had been determined where she was going. Now Ames is persuading her that because she has a new life in Christ, her past does not determine who she will be or what will happen to her in life or thereafter.
Yeah, I noted a lot of places where she thinks that what she's been determines what she will be. And it reminds me of that Joyce Carol Oates story, or at least the title of it, Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? And where have you where you've been determines where you're going. Anyway, she's seeing this differently all of a sudden, since she's been baptized, and Ames says, you're, a newborn child now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think there's something about the shift from the city to the open cornfields and to the open expanse of Iowa that kind of reflects that. It's all open. You can pretty easily move in any direction that you want. There's no mountain in the way. There's no canyon to stop you from going someplace. So that there's something about that that's reflected in that sort of idea of it's all open. You can stay here. Ames even seems to be like, you can stay here, you can leave. He kind of says to her. He would like for her to stay, certainly. But anything else that we should make sure that we get in, comment upon, ponder before we close for the day?
Well, I think I have read the ending, of course. So, her pressing question throughout seems to be, so what happens to people who have not been baptized or have not, etc.? So maybe we will answer that question.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm still curious to see if this baby is born during the course of this novel. Like how Ames will certainly want to baptize the child, I would imagine. And Bowden probably will also. And how Lila reflects on that. For her own child. Does that seem like a good idea? Does it seem like a necessary idea? Does it just what she might come to think of that? So Jenny,
it's interesting,
go ahead.
Because essentially what we have here is a prequel, and I don't know if we've really talked about that a whole lot, about book 3 being a before. I mean, I know I've made comments about how Lila is so different now that we're in her brain. She's so different than how I perceived her through the lens of Gilead and Ames's letter writing and home and Glory's story, which is interesting. I thought of this earlier when we were talking about names. This is the first novel in which we get the title of the novel as one of the characters' names. Also interesting because it's not really her name. I mean, it is her name. It's the name she ends up with. It's the name as we know her and she spends most of her life with. So I'm really curious to finish this out and see. I mean, I guess I don't actually know if she stays. We know she's there when we pick up whatever 7, 8, I can't remember how old the boy is in Gilead, but so she's still there then. But I'm curious to see how this one finishes out, this prequel of sorts.
Yeah. Well, it certainly provided us good food for thought and for conversation up to this point, and I don't know why it would stop over the course of the last 40 pages or whatever it is that's left. A few more for some of us. I'm 3 pages behind. That's not bad.
That's not bad.
Just fine.
So, okay. Well, thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Constance, for joining in this conversation. We have one last conversation that'll take place on Thursday, November something. Somebody will find me the date. Maybe 10th. Yeah, I could have done that math. Thursday, November 10th. in the evening time. That's open. Anybody can join in for that conversation that would like. So on behalf of Jenny and Constance and myself, I suppose, thanks for listening and watching, and until next time, I have to keep reading, I guess.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.